welcome all. This is quite a crowd, which was not fully expected. It shows the importance of making reservations, those of you who didn't. But anyway, it's a great, great pleasure to welcome you all this evening. I'm Ed Gallagher, President of the American Scandinavian Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our headquarters, Scandinavia House, for this lecture by Erik Aschengreen, August Bournonville, and the Danish Joy of Dance, presented in conjunction with the Joyce Theatre, where the dancers from the Danish Royal Ballet will be presenting a selection of Bournonville works beginning tomorrow evening and continuing until Saturday evening. At its incorporation in New York City in 1911, the ASF was the first international non-governmental society to have as its sole purpose the development of goodwill through the exchange of people and ideas. It was designed to meet the needs of its time through fellowships, internships, publications, as well as a wide variety of educational and cultural programs that we present right here at Scandinavia House. It's a particular pleasure to present this evening's program. The ASF has long been a supporter of the Royal Ballet, and in 2009 we had the honor to present to the director of the Royal Ballet, Nikolai Huba, the ASF Cultural Award. We've also been very pleased to be able to cooperate with the Joyce Theatre over the years by supporting a number of Scandinavian dance troupes who've appeared there. And I would particularly like to commend the Joyce for the leadership it has taken in promoting international dance here in the U.S. I'd also just like to mention parenthetically that here at Scandinavia House we'll be having another exciting program on January 15th, which is when UN Deputy Secretary Jan Eliasson and Swedish pianist Per Tengstrand will honor the memory of the great UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld with a special evening of music and readings from markings. I hope you'll come back for that evening. But right now, I do want to turn the mic over to Melissa Proshorn of the Joyce Theatre, who will introduce our speaker. Melissa?
Good evening. Thank you for being with us. I am Melissa. I am the Manager of Audience Engagement at the Joyce Theatre. We would like to thank very much the American Scandinavian Foundation for hosting us here at the Scandinavia House for this dance talk on this week's presentation of Principals and Soloists from the Royal Danish Ballet. And this is part of an ongoing series. Each dance talk experience is about an hour lecture with some time for Q&A, and we'll also have some video samples of some of the works that you'll be seeing this week at the Joyce. Hopefully you'll be coming downtown to join us. And I am very pleased to introduce tonight's lecturer. Erik Aschengreen is the grand old man of Danish ballet history and dance journalism. Those are his words. For his doctoral studies, he completed his dissertation on Jean Cocteau and the dance. He founded the Dance Aesthetics and History program at the University of Copenhagen, where he lectured for nearly 30 years. He has also been a dance critic and taught ballet history at the Royal Danish Ballet School for over 20 years and later at the School of Contemporary Dance. Over the years, he has taught and lectured all over the United States, including Jacob's Pillow, the University of Chicago, American Dance Festival, Sarah Lawrence College, Mills College, the University of California at Riverside and at Irvine, and in China and Japan, and in other European universities, often in connection with guest performances of the Royal Danish Ballet. He has written a number of books, most recently Dancing Across the Atlantic, which is here for your perusement and perhaps purchase after the talk. And tonight he will be discussing the characteristics of Bournonville's dance style and how the Bournonville tradition has been preserved from generation to generation. Please join me in welcoming Erik.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you for coming, all these people, old friends and new faces. I hope we'll have aired enough for the third act of Napoli, but we shall see. Actually, it is this year, as many of you might know, 6 years since the first little group from the Royal Danish Ballet came to Jacob's Pillow Ted Shorts Festival in Massachusetts. Actually, they became very loved from the beginning. It was a love affair between the American audience, even the critics, and the Danes. Some of the critics have already made acquaintance with the Danes when the Royal Danish Ballet in the 1950s began their summer festivals in Copenhagen and were discovered an unknown treasure with the Bournonville repertoire danced in an unbroken tradition since the beginning of the 19th century. In 1956, the whole Danish ballet came for the first time to the US. They danced 6 weeks in 12 cities, and the first 2 weeks they performed in New York. And they were a success. Walter Terry wrote in New York Herald Tribune, "It's impossible not to love this splendid Danish artist who performed with bubbling, sparkling friendliness, who danced as if they were in love with dancing, and who all share their enthusiasm." And John Martin was in New York Times of the same opinion. A winning performance it was, he wrote. The Danish ballet, from its impish ballet children to its mature character dancers, it's pretty thoroughly irresistible. Its people are handsome, its dancing is expert, and its artistry unimpeachable. Its style is all its own and stem from its greatest ballet master, August Bournonville, who flourished in the last century. That was in 1996 they wrote this. Bournonville was the key figure, and he still is. But there was also a certain atmosphere in the company which made a deep impression on the American audience. Doris Herring did sum up her impression of the whole tour in Dance Magazine in November 1956, where she wrote, "But it wasn't the sets, it wasn't the costumes, it often wasn't the ballet or its music that made the Royal Danish Ballet so endearing. It simply was the performers, a group of people who managed to keep intact the innocence that should belong to all artists, but that many so sadly lose." And I do hope and believe that you're going to find the same spirit between the performers in the little group that you're going to see the next week at the Joyce Theatre. A lot has happened over the 60 years since the Danes came for the first time. The company has made 11 tours to US, and groups and individual dancers have come again and again. The company has changed and is today an international company with many dancers from abroad, but August Bournonville is still the key figure. Bournonville was born in 1805, the same year as Hans Christian Andersen, who wanted so very much to become a ballet dancer. He also tried, the feet were too big, so he wrote his fairy tales instead. But August Bournonville became a dancer, splendid, elegant dancer, and later on he became choreographer, artistic director of the Royal Danish Ballet, a position he held from 1830 to 1877 with a few interruptions, a very long period. It was by chance that August Bournonville became Danish. His father, Antoine Bournonville, who was an elegant and handsome dancer, was employed by the Swedish king, Gustav III, and danced in Stockholm. In 1792, Antoine Bournonville performed in Copenhagen as a guest, and two things happened. He fell in love with his Danish partner, that very often fell in love with his other dancers. They don't meet so many other people, so that's the reason. But he fell in love with his partner, and the other important thing was that the Swedish king was murdered at a masquerade. So Antoine decided to stay in Denmark. He had nothing to do with the assassination of the Swedish king, but he was French, and here, 3 years after the French Revolution, he was, as French, a little suspicious. In all the kingdoms of Europe, there was a fear for what could happen if the people took over. So Antoine stayed in Denmark, and August Bournonville became Danish. Bournonville August was educated by his father and by the Italian dancer and choreographer Vincenzo Galliotti, who was artistic director in Copenhagen 1775 to 1816, and actually the one who founded the Royal Danish Ballet. Later on, August Bournonville should give fame to the company, but first he completed his dance education in Paris in the 1820s. He was engaged and danced at the Paris Opera. He could have made an international career, as many Danes did after him, but he preferred to go back to Denmark, for several reasons. First of all, he felt terribly Danish. Second, he was in Paris when the Romantic Ballet began to flourish and the ballerina took over the center of the stage. Bournonville was educated in a system where the male dancer was the important person on stage. The French king, Louis XIV, had been dancing himself, and who could be a better dancer than the king? So the male person was the important person. But when Bournonville entered the stage, the woman, the romantic ballerina, became the important figure in the ballets, and that was not what Bournonville wanted for himself. So he went home, became artistic director in Copenhagen, where he created his own ballets and where he danced the leading male parts until he retired as a dancer in 1848. And, as you may know, in Bournonville ballets, the male dancers are just as important as the female. There is to me no doubt that there is a connection between all the great male dancers the Royal Danish Ballet has raised over the years and Bournonville's own position with all the beautiful parts and steps he created for men. And perhaps I should add that in all his dancing years, Bournonville constantly had a dispute quarrel with his ballerinas. There was jealousy naturally, but there was also a fight between the choreographer and the ballerina, who had the final word. In the Romantic period, the ballerinas, Marie Taglioni, Fanny Elster, took the final decisions. Later on, the choreographer was a man or woman who had the final word. And exactly this battle took place in Bournonville's years as artistic director. In the beginning of his period as head for the Royal Danish Ballet, August Bournonville was leaning on the French repertoire. And one of his first successes was La Sylphide, which was premiered in Paris in 1832. Created from Marie Taglioni, it was a breakthrough for the Romantic Ballet. Bournonville saw the ballet in Paris in 1834 and staged it in Copenhagen 2 years later. He did steal the libretto, there was no copyright at that time, and he did a few changes which made it a more dramatic ballet than the French version. The witch match became a much more important figure in his version. The Parisian version disappeared. It was in 1972 reconstructed by Pierre Lacotte, while the Danish version has been danced in an unbroken tradition. It's always dangerous when a young man begins to dream about Sylphides the day he's going to marry. And that is what happens to the young James, who is the hero in La Sylphide. His mind is divided and in a state of unrest. He does not feel really truly at home in the snug bourgeois world, to which he is about to bind himself this very day by marrying the sweet Effie. He loves his Effie, but he also has dreams and longings that reach far beyond this mundane existence. He dreams of another world, and the Sylphide is the symbol of that world. She lures him away from his wedding and his beloved out into the woods. La Sylphide is a story about being seduced. The Romantic artists were intensely concerned with feelings, passions, eroticism. They were both tempted and afraid. And the young August Bournonville knew everything about the beautiful danger. When he started as a young man in Paris, he not only did his daily training with Batman and Conchuté, he also got a child with a sister to one of his dancing friends. He kept silent about this for the rest of his life. Not even his wife knew anything about it, because Bournonville knew very well that it could have cost him his job. The King of Denmark, who was very much into the theatre and directed it more or less, would not appoint a ballet director who dropped kids here and there along his way through Europe. So, from the bottom of his heart, August Bournonville knew the danger and probably also the sweetness of being seduced. At the Joyce during the week, you will see the beautiful scenes from the second act where James dances with the Sylphides in the forest, and you will see match as well, so that the famous Bournonville mime also will be represented. The Sylphides live in the forest, in the trees. They can be 300 years and still look beautiful, and that is the dangerous thing about them. I would like here to show you a scene from the first act of La Sylphide, where the Sylphide stands in the window and tells James how unhappy she is that he's going to marry Effie and trying to lure him out into the forest. In this scene, we also have what is so typical for the Romantic ballet, the inside and the outside, the secure and the dangerous, and its nature, which is outside, which is dangerous. And then we have the faraway countries. Scotland was very far away from Denmark in that period. The scene we're going to see also shows us something typical for a Bournonville ballet, as for other ballets from the period, I guess, the mixture of dance and mime, and the mime is choreographed on the music as well as the steps, and that's the reason we've been able to keep it more or less intact. You're going to see two Danish dancers, Thomas Lund as James and Gudrun Bøjsen as Lasse Fit, and actually you have a chance to see her again tomorrow night if there are more tickets, but she will be there the whole week. The take is from the third Bornwheel Festival in 2005, celebrating the 200th anniversary for Bornwhyl's birth. And now we're going, Bill, to have the first. And what about the little... Sorry, that's okay. just managed to get him out in the forest, and you can, the judge theater, see what happens. La Sylphide is the only tragic ballet in Bournonville's about 50 ballets. And as I said, the plot was French. It was created in the 1830s, and the 1830s are also the period in the Danish literature and art where the artists were concerned with spleen, unrest, but they did conquer these tendencies, and so did Bournonville. In his ballet, the sun is shining, and if there are obstacles, and so there are, they will be conquered, so we will have a happy ending with even more sunshine. This is evident in his main work, Napoli, from 1842, which tells us a story about a fisherman and his bride who conquer all obstacles, both erotic and demonic, before arriving to the third act, which is one of the happiest stage pictures in European ballet tradition. And when you tomorrow, or one of the other days, see the performance finished with the happy dances from the third act, Padécis and Tarantella, please remember that the main couple has fought very much for this happiness in the two previous acts. Bournonville believed in a world with meaning and order and beauty. His ballets may appear to be ideals, but the happy endings are hard-won. He represents the lightness and optimism of the Danish Romanticism. And if you're going to remember only one thing from this evening and from this week, it should be the word harmony, the feeling of harmony. Harmony is Bournonville's watchword, and it's up to his art to send this harmony over the footlight. For a moment, his audience shall feel the lightness as if they were dancing themselves. And after the third act of Napoli, you should feel as if the dance has taken away the heaviness, the weight of your body. And if you don't have this feeling, that you can dance yourself, you can go to the box office and claim your money back. Something has worked. And let me stop a moment with the dance. The Bournonville style is a French style, but adopted and arranged by Bournonville, perhaps under influence of the smaller stage in Copenhagen, for instance, compared with what happened to the French style in Russia. There are many characteristics of the Bournonville style. Let me mention a few. The phrasing and the musicality, small steps are small and big steps are big. The use of the stage. The dancers change direction, using the whole stage, often surprising us. And if the dancer is downstage and has to go upstage to begin a solo or something like that, he dances up to the backstage, he doesn't walk. The arms are held down, rabat, which gives a lovely contrast to the working legs with battery and entrechamp, and there's a lot of battery in the Bournonville style. And if you go a little far in the interpretation of the steps, you could say that the upper part of the body is kept calm, and while a lot is going on from below, from the waist and below, where it starts to become fun, but the harmony is kept. The light epaulement is typical as well. The head follows the legs, which is moving. It's a way to put our attention to the working leg. And remember that in the 19th century, the ballerina had skirts, which meant they went almost to the floor, so they had no legs, only feet. And you should also know that the ballerinas in Copenhagen, the ballerina skirts were sewn together so that the gentlemen in the orchestra and audience didn't see anything they were not supposed to see. So that was the stage tradition up until the 1930s. And then the epaulement should be very graceful. The ladies danced with a corset, so they couldn't move their shoulders very much. And that has become a style now, even the corset has gone long ago, but they still have this very graceful épaulement. Bournonville loved some steps more than others. There is a lot of rond de champ, is in variation, and first of all, this grand jeté en avant, that's the Water called the Danish embrace. And indeed, it has a great effect on a great stage when the dancers are flying towards the footlights. I'm going to show you a few examples of typical Bournonville exercises. The steps and variations have been preserved in the ballets, which have gone from generation to generation. But we also have something we call the Bournonville School, the daily classes. There is a class for each day in the week, the Monday class, the Tuesday class, the Wednesday class, and so on. These classes are not created, shaped by Bournonville himself, even if we call them the Bournonville School. They were arranged after his death by his successor, mainly Hans Beck, and they were made in the 1890s, and Bournonville died in 1879. But they were made to keep the style. So these classes no doubt reflect parts of his own classes. They consist of steps that his pupil remembered from his teachings, steps created by himself, and variations from Bonowicz's ballets. So the classes were very dancing. Towards the end of the classes, they are more solely. On Monday, they dance a variation from La Ventana. On Tuesday, we have the first male solo from La Sylphide, and so on. And all the dancers got to dance these variations, even if they never managed to be James or whatever on stage, they danced these variations. So these classes were the only training system within Royal Danish Ballet from 1895 and until 1930. Every Monday, in whole life, they danced the Monday class. And you could wake a dancer in the middle of the night and play the music, and he or she would dance like a circus horse. It was not a very sensible way of teaching. And Bono himself did stress that the teacher should change exercises after the age and ability of the pupil, but this way of teaching kept the Bonowitz style. In 1932, Herr Lander became artistic director of the Royal Danish Ballet, and he changed the daily training. The company kept the Bonowitz ballets, but Lander also wanted to expand the repertoire and dance, for instance, the Russian classics, and to that end he also revised the daily training. But the Bonowitz classes were still there, taught on and off, more or less, but still there. Some dancers wrote it down, and Kirsten Rahler, a principal dancer and later vice director, published the classes in 1979 in Danish and Latin notation. They were filmed several times, and the last time and the most complete was in 2005. And I would like to show you 6 exercises from this DVD, 6 exercises from the Wednesday class. And they're danced by Gudrun Bøjsen, you just saw as La Sylphide, Karen Cavallo, who is an American dancer who had her career in Denmark, Christopher Sakurai, who's actually the Danish dancer, even the name is Japanese, and Thomas Lund, who is now the head of the school. So if we would have number 2. It looks very easy. It isn't. These exercises lead me to the question, how was the Bournonville tradition preserved on stage? These were the classes, but what happened on stage? Bournonville would have been very surprised if he knew that we are here today. He thought that his ballets would be danced for a period, shorter or longer, after his death, and then disappear. But reality was to become another one, as you know. He created about 50 ballets over the years, and when he left the position as artistic director, he had restaged 21. Over the years, some of them naturally disappeared, and today we have 8 ballets performed in an unbroken tradition, a pas de deux from the Flower Festival in Tiensano, and a few reconstructions, the Conservatory at Darla and from Siberia to Moscow. Up until 1925, Bournonville ballets were the main repertory for the Royal Danish Ballet in Copenhagen. And so strong was this tradition that you knew what happened, which happened in Europe with Diaghilev's Ballet Russe, did not really find its way to Copenhagen. But in 1925, the direction of the Royal Theatre Copenhagen discovered that perhaps something should happen if the ballet should keep the interest as a living art form, and the Royal Theatre invited Michel Fokine in 1925 and Balanchine in 1930 to 31. Balanchine staged Apollo. It wasn't a great success. It was performed 7 times, and it was not a success nor with the audience, nor with the critics who wrote it was like immense gymnastics. But the dancers actually figured out how far behind they were. And in the year after Balanchine left in 1932, Harlander then became artistic director, as I mentioned, and he renewed the company. He was a choreographer himself, you know, perhaps his ballet's Etude, and he staged Bournonville and shaped the ballets after what he thought would go with the audience of the day. For instance, he did a lot of cut in the mime stuff, which he found a little old-fashioned. Ever since, it has been the challenge and the obligation for an artistic director of the Royal Danish Ballet to have a Bournonville policy to preserve and renew. We talk about an unbroken tradition, but naturally a lot of things have happened over the years. The dancers go on point, but they hardly did it Bournonville's time. The costume has changed a lot, and so have the dancers' bodies and technique. They do more pirouettes than Bournonville did in his time. He was a very bad turner, and he took extra classes in turning when he studied in Paris. But still, we have the feeling that the Bournonville ballets in Copenhagen bring us nearer, closer to the Romantic period than any other company. Bournonville festivals in Copenhagen in 1979, 92, and 2005, the last celebrating his 200th years anniversary, have cultivated and shown this tradition to the world. And not least American critics, historians, and audience came to these festivals and wrote enthusiastically about them. The performance of the 8 ballets we still have are recorded and thus saved for eternity. This gives the artistic director of the Royal Danish Ballet a freer hand to experiment and play with the tradition, which is actually what Nikolaj Hübbe and Solana Ellemann, sitting here on the first row, over these years have done with staging Napoli in Italy in the 1950s instead of 1842, inspired of Federico Fellini's film, or a folk tale where they dig a bit deeper in subconsciousness and the grotesque, and finally, La Sylphide from this season, where the setting is quite shocking, no romantic forest, but a white room. And with Nikolaj himself as the witch match in the figure of an elegant dandy. Let me give you only one scene from this new controversial staging, the scene in the second act, where the witch match gives the young James a scarf, which is going to kill the Sylphide, while James thinks he's going to catch his beloved with a scarf. But her wings fell off and she dies. You can't catch the sylph. Nikolaj Hübbe plays Match, the witch, and Ulrik Birkjær, who has organized this tour and sitting here also, on the first row, he is dancing James, a very dramatic scene, has always been, but this time even more dramatic. So could we have the third one? The Bonneville celebration you are going to witness this week at the Joyce Theatre shows off the classical tradition the Danish dancers are brought up with, and which meet foreign dancers who are now an important part of the company. It is mostly the dancing side we are going to see this coming week, since 13 dancers in a group is not enough to perform a whole Bonneville ballet, which needs 50, 60 people on stage. But they do bring the wonderful character dancer Sorella Englund, who will perform the match on certain evenings and give us an idea of the Bonneville mime, which you also will see in the scenes between La Sylphide and James. And the night that Sorella is not a dancing match, you will have a boy, a young boy, who is dancing the dandiest James and see. So you see the range the Bonneville ballet can have. But mostly the 13 dancers will show us the joy of the Bonneville dance, the harmony, and what was characteristic for the first group at Jakobspillo 60 years ago, the joy of dancing and being together on stage. Dancers from the Royal Danish Ballet are proud of their tradition, and they want to go abroad and show their national heritage. They do it this week. It's actually their holidays, but they prefer to come here. You are going at the Joyce to see excerpts from the two ballets I've talked about, La Sylphide and Napoli. We shall also see the Sylphides and James dancing in the forest in the second act, and the program closes with the third act, which is really the heart of the Royal Danish Ballet. But you're also going to see the Pas de Trois from the Conservatory from 1849, where Bonneville remembered his youth in Paris in the 1820s. He took classes at the Conservatory in Paris, he made his debut at the opera, and at this ballet we come as close as we can to the way of dancing in Paris in the beginning of the 19th century. You're going to see the Pas de Sept from Bonneville's most Danish ballet, A Folk Tale. Actually, the Pas de Sept is actually danced by gypsies for the wedding festivities towards the end of the ballet. And in Nicolas Hupp's staging, the gypsies are more like dancers from the theatre and costumed like that. You shall see the jockey dance from Bonneville's last ballet, From Siberia to Moscow, from 1876. Actually, the only dance existing from this ballet. In 2009, the whole ballet was reconstructed, restaged in Tbilisi, in Georgia, where Nina Ananiashvili is artistic director, and she loves Bonneville quite a lot, and she had asked Frank Anderson and a group of Bonneville experts to reconstruct. You can ask why there are two English jockeys in a ballet with the title From Siberia to Moscow. The explanation is that in the last act, towards the end of the ballet, there is a big divertissement, as in the big Russian ballets. Bonneville had been in Russia in 1874, and even if he didn't like what he saw, he was quick enough to take this idea with a big divertissement to finish the ballet. The divertissement has dances representing different rivers in Europe, and the jockeys represent the Thames in London. So tomorrow you will see two English jockeys costumed in Danish colors, red and white, to make the confusion perfect. Finally, you shall see Bonneville's perhaps most famous dance, Pas de Deux, the Pas de Deux from the Flower Festival in Genzano. The Flower Festival in Genzano was created in 1858 and is one of Bonneville's many Italian ballets. Italy was the beloved country for the Nordic artists. Here was the sun, the people were happy, and you could pick oranges directly from the trees. The full Flower Festival in Genzano was last performed in 1920, but the Pas de Deux survived over the next 20 years in the school until it in 1949 again was danced on the stage. And at the beginning of the 1950s, this Pas de Deux was actually the first Bonneville piece really to travel abroad. You should see the Danes dance the Pas de Deux tomorrow, but I also want to finish here with the Pas de Deux, so typical for Bonneville. If you haven't got a ticket, well, you should see it here. It's danced by Gudrun Bøjesen and Mads Blankstrup at the last night of the Bonneville Festival in 2005. And then one thing more. When you see the two dancers take curtain calls, they bow to the right, seen from the stage, before they bow to the audience in the theatre. This bow to the right tells us that the royal family is in the royal box. The royal family has been very important for the Royal Danish Ballet in several generations. They have loved the company and ballet as an art form. Her Majesty Queen Margrethe, who even has designed set and costumes for Bonneville's A Folk Tale in 1991, is patron for the organization American Friends of the Royal Danish Ballet, founded in 2008, and heavily sponsoring the book I have made, which you can buy over there. And her sister, Her Royal Highness Princess Benedikte, is patron in Denmark for the Friends of the Royal Danish Ballet. And actually, the princess has been very active in helping this week at the George to become a reality to come through. So, during the curtain call, you will see those ladies in the royal box in the last evening of the Bournonville Fest in 2005, Princess Benedikte to the right, Margrethe, the Queen, to the left, and in the middle, the Prince Consort. And in the next box, you will catch a glimpse of the Crown Prince Frederik and his Crown Princess Mary. So, in this way, you will now be in the Royal Theatre in Copenhagen with August Bournonville, the pas de deux from the Flower Festival, danced by Gudrun Boysen and Mads Blankstrup, and the royal family. Hope you will enjoy it, as I hope you have enjoyed this little talk. But if there are any questions, I am naturally willing to answer. And I think Wednesday night we have a dance chat after the performance, where we go on all night. So you can just come. But if there is something now here, right here, struck your mind, I'm here to help you. Yes, sure.
Do you know when the man's going to be shooting again with the right?
The man's born with shoe with the right ankle. That's a question we are always asked, and I know a lot of dancers will tell you that the something born will figure out because he thought it looked elegant. It's not right. We don't know. But I can tell we have always, as long as I've been there, it has been like that from in the whole 20th century. But I've been in Vienna at the Ballet Dance Theater there, Theater Museum, found ballet shoes from that period with that white slit. So apparently it's something which has been common in Europe at that time, and the Danes have kept it.
It's wonderful seeing these films. And I know the Danes have this great tradition of films going back almost a century of vaudeville. How much film is there of the kind of intervening years, like dancers like Niels Kehlet, or indeed dancers going back to the 30s and 40s?
There is not much, but there are quite a lot in this Kehlet actually. There are from the 60s, but many of the films there are without music. You could put the music on, but they are without the music. We don't really have music from until the TV starts to make productions that we see in the middle of the 60s.
I have a question about the classes. I know you said that there was like 6 classes Monday through Saturday. Is there a different class for like beginning, intermediate, and advanced?
No. They did the same every day, and the young people started back there, and they looked after that, and then as the years go, they were moving up, and then there were new ones staying behind. That was the type of pedagogical learning in the period. No, there was not a curriculum for the kids. There are 3 dancers, Sorella Ingo, there is Gregory Dean, and there's Ulla Birker. And the other one, I don't know what they do tonight, but they will be there tomorrow.
The segment of the contemporary La Sophie that you showed us really piqued my curiosity. Does the Sophie in that wear the traditional romantic tutu, or is it something more contemporary? And what was the critical reception?
Sorry, the last one? What was?
Does the Sophie wear the traditional long romantic tutu, or does she wear a more contemporary costume? And what was the critical reception to that staging?
The last thing first, the critical reception was it's always mixed, which means that it works. There are people loving it, and there are people not. There will people be from abroad who hate it, and as Nikolai Hübel said, this is a production that people would love to hate. There were other people thinking, well, it's interesting that we are trying something. For myself, I can say I'm no longer a critic, but I would say if this had happened in 1950, I would think it would be dangerous because the tradition could be lost. Now we are 50 years, 60 years later, and you can do a lot of things because the tradition is there. We have everything kept and written down. And there are tutus, not the completely romantic tutu, but white romantic tutus.
I learned something new that Bournonville had an illegitimate child.
Yes.
In Paris.
Yes.
So one question is, did he have descendants? Is there a Bournonville family in France?
We don't know. It was a daughter, and actually Bournonville went down, or as long as the daughter was, and children grew up. He came as an uncle from the north with quite a lot of money. His wife always thought it was a little strange that he had so much money with him to Paris. But it was not until Bournonville's will was opened. As far as I know, he followed the daughter until she married a lieutenant in the army, and there our research stops for the moment.
So my next question is, it was not in his job description to be ballet master in Copenhagen if he had an illegitimate
No,
child.
no.
You must be joking that the Royal Danish Ballet was the only ballet company in Europe where they had no.
I'm I'm not joking. I don't know I don't know what they did behind the wings and under the seats. But I can tell you, Bournonville's father, now we're going. It will be short. Bournonville's father married the lady he was dancing with. They got 3 children together. Then she died. Bournonville's father went on going to bed with his housekeeper. And he got August Bournonville, his son of the housekeeper. And now it comes. When Antoine Bournonville, the father, was going to be ballet director in Copenhagen, the king said, you're only going to have the positions if you marry a housekeeper.
So let me ask you, is this the only royal family that had in Europe that had no legitimate dukes?
No, but that's something for the royal family, that's something different.
Not in France and not in the UK. So are you telling us a history that Denmark's royal family was different from other?
No, they weren't family. The family had their plans and their problems and their children, illegitimate still. But that doesn't mean that we kept the surface that here we have a very moral society. And that's what I call the Biedermeier, where we have that, and then there's something in between. And that's actually Bournonville Ballet reflect this nice surface and something in between.
You said that of the 50 or so ballets that Bournonville made, there are about 8 that
Yes.
are in current repertory. Can you help me count them? I got up to about 6 or 7.
We'll do it together. There's a folk tale, there's Napoli, there is the conservatory, there's La Sylphide, there's Far from Denmark, there's Kermesse in Bruges, and there is the King's Volunteers of Amager,
That's right, that's 7.
and then there's La Ventana. Thank you very much.
Lovely.
So,
Thank you.
So, I think enough history for tonight. So let's have a drink. Thank you for coming.